Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start, I want to make a disclaimer for YouTube. This is a mock speech for my University COM 275 communications class. This speech is designed to persuade. The purpose of this speech is to convince the federal government, the local governments, to invest exclusive in mental health, behavior and addiction residential rehabilitation centers versus rapid rehousing for the homeless and mental health issues. Exclusive mental health, behavioral addiction, and residential rehabilitation clinics, known as Embark, have the best services to provide tailored rehabilitation solutions for our national crisis of domestic terrorism, addiction, and homelessness issues. Most homeless people need a classification for detox, rehabilitation, mental health therapy, and psychiatric services before they are placed in permanent housing because they keep relapsing. Unfortunately, most homeless end up back on the streets again for various reasons. Some homeless have received housing grant vouchers for renting apartments and houses. And they go move into the homes, but after a few months, they end up back on the streets again with the voucher. Eventually, they get evicted. Embark, we have figured out the solutions by trial and error, by rescuing the homeless, placing them in housing, and studying them for the causes of why they become homeless. Addictions and mental illnesses are present. The only way to rescue a homeless problem due to the drug and alcohol addictions with mental health twists, most patients will need to be rehabilitated and keep a lifelong ambulatory commitment to ongoing therapy and medication treatment because most of them, not all of them, most of them will end up back on the streets. Let me explain why by using the city of Los Angeles as an example, as I have here on the screen. This is the city of Los Angeles, and you can see the epidemic. It is quite overwhelming. Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority conducts the count of the number of homeless in the city. The last count the LAHSA conducted was in January of 2020. The number of homeless counted in the city of Los Angeles was 66,433. Most homeless people need classification process to establish proper placing and treatment before placed in permanent housing because they relapse and end up back on the streets again. Homelessness has become an epidemic and a complicated problem without a clear solution. Government agencies have tried to do their due diligence by incorporating various spending measures to address the crises, yet they are still wondering why homelessness is not getting better. The solutions for each individual vary from case to case. A prescription tailored to the particular person in a residential environment to each willing or unwilling patient or homeless person required with government aid programs and community resources to heal or put a band-aid on the problem. Why do I say that? Because some of these things are incurable. That's what we're going to move on to next. Placing homeless, addicted, and mental health patients in housing and believing that they will appreciate the gesture, act normal, and assimilate into society is a fantasy. The problems they are struggling with are so intense that it takes a coalition, a higher power, to make a noticeable difference. The problems keep getting worse and more progressive, and it is snowballing. Unfortunately, this is not something one can throw money at to resolve. It is an incurable epidemic without a current solution, increasing to the point of a crisis and a public risk. At Embark, we guarantee a solution for most of our annex patients. We are working as a team with our psychiatrists, psychologists, general practitioners, and a variety of therapists and security personnel to monitor and chart each patient. Our leading medical proprietary blueprint methods of treatment in modules provide a fail secure way of therapy that delivers results. Allow me to explain why homeless, addicted mental health patients need a rescue from the bondage of their situation to reach actual freedom. The article will explain and demonstrate what is happening now. The Los Angeles Times printed a story by Thomas Kerwin titled, One's House, Two Friends Find Themselves Homeless Again. The article is about two friends, Nisi and Dion, living in tents on Main Street here in LA in front of a facade of a building. 11 months prior, they had new apartments with amenities paid. They were fast tracked into housing through a one time program known as Encampment to Home in El Segundo, California. The two friends were back on the streets living side by side. Once they were in housing, their most significant challenge was to abide by management rules and regulations. They tried to adapt to the new style of living, however, their disrespectful attitude, threatening behavior, fighting on the premises led to their eviction, and they were back on the streets again. That's by Kerwin Thomas. Nisi and Dion have Section 8 vouchers. They can look for a new apartment. However, it is hard for them to find a place because the renters do not want to rent to them. The homeless have a reputation for bringing the lifestyle home. The behavior of such begins to manifest to the point that it becomes a nuisance to the neighborhood. The homeless people do not believe that they're doing anything wrong, by the way. They just are. So whatever they're doing out there, they're going to do wherever they go. So if they're into this over there, all the friends that they have there, they're going to bring all that home unless they understand they have to let some things go in order to have one thing or the other. There's a reason why they ended up homeless. Now, in order to rehabilitate them, we have to place them in a rehabilitation clinic where they are charted and measured as to their progress and when they are capable of sustaining a lifestyle fit for the community. Otherwise, they end up back on the streets. Substance Abuse and Homelessness was published by the National Coalition for the Homeless in 2017. One may stereotype the homeless population as all drug abusers or alcoholics. Many homeless people struggle with substance abuse, addictions, and require treatment. However, this problem should be viewed as an illness that requires counseling and support to overcome. Substance abuse causes homelessness, but often arises after people lose their houses. The accurate and recent numbers on homeless substance abuse are tough. Most statistics prove that substance abuse is more common among homeless people than in the general population. Statistics from HUD since 2015 annual homeless assessment report state approximately 2,570,000 homeless people have severe mental illness or chronic substance abuse issues. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration 2003 estimates that 38% of the homeless people are dependent on alcohol and 26% abuse other drugs. According to the 2015 National Household Survey on Drug Use and Health, only 10.1% of the people above 12 reported using drugs within the past month. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration found that 8.4% of adults had substance abuse issues within the last year. That's in the general population. Alcohol abuse is common in older generations, while drug abuse is more common in homeless youth and adults. Does substance abuse cause job loss? Of course it does. Addictions affects relationships with families and friends too. In 2014 survey, the United States Conference of Mayors asked 25 cities for their top three causes of homelessness. Substance abuse and lack of neither service was cited by 43% of cities, making it tied for the third leading cause. Substance abuse was also mentioned by 13% of cities as one of the top three causes of families. Homeless people often turn to drugs and alcohol to cope with their situation. They use substance in an attempt to attain temporary relief from their problems. However, substance dependence only exacerbates their problems and decreases their ability to achieve employment stability. Furthermore, get off the streets. Additionally, some people may view drugs and alcohol use as necessary to be accepted among the homeless community. Breaking an addiction is difficult for everyone, especially the homeless. For substance abusers who are homeless, the motivation to stop using substance may be below average for many homeless people. If you look at their situation, they're not into rehabilitating because they don't see the light, basically, and they just throw themselves to whatever's clever at the time. And it's hard to turn somebody from willing to unwilling in something that they believe is going their way. Many homeless people have become estranged from their families and friends without social support. Recovering from substance addiction is extremely difficult. Even if they break their addictions, homeless people face difficulty resisting widely accessible substances in every area that they're in. Unfortunately, many treatment programs focus on abstinence only programming, which is less effective than harm reduction strategies and does not address the possibility of relapse. We are having an epidemic of relapse right now from just transitional housing, from the streets to the apartment, and a relapse happens within a few months. Back on the streets again. So no matter what you do, unless you rehabilitate, you're not going to fix the problem. That's why we can't keep doing the same thing, rehousing, and expecting a different result because it just bounces right back on the streets again. Um, Homeless people with substance disorders and mental illnesses experience additional substances recoveries, such as the increased risk of violence and victimization and frequent cycling between streets, jails, and emergency rooms. Unfortunately, these people cannot find treatment facilities that will help them. When you're evicted, usually the only thing waiting for you out there is jail, hospital, or the morgue. And that's what they're facing. The jail, hospital, or the morgue every day with this carrying on like they do, homeless, panhandling, living in a tent, and just doing more drugs. and just existed. By now, you can see why we need to set the captives straight. There, through Embark rehabilitation services and not immediate transitional housing. Through Embark, which is rehab, I feel strongly about proposing a rescue mission to our government because Embark is helping the homeless, addicts, and the mentally ill in our community already who end up homeless and rehabilitated. I have tried many different approaches and methods to help people. I realize that only one blueprint works, a hold down system, because there is no cure for such causes as addiction, mental illness, or character defects known to science. The percentage of homelessness due to the financial reasons, lack of opportunity, or lack of education to get work is very tiny. It is impossible to help a person with only one service provider because of the long-term needed therapies to maintain healthy lifestyle. The rescue mission consists of and requires a coalition of services with a fundraising campaign program to fund the program services with constant monitoring for status reports and directions of patients and service providers. I want to advise you that no one rehab center is known to have the cure to the problem. Those of us that are in the rehabilitation science, we understand that it is a coalition of services that need to be deployed in order to be successful permanently. If you see a rehab center open up and they claim that they're doing it all by themselves, don't believe that because that is not scientifically possible. There's a particular way it has to happen for the individual. It's not all science. There is a higher power involved in the process because it takes an act of God to help somebody like that. It is not simple. It is not something you can say, they're enchiladas. No, this is a long-term, long-term process. We can only go in there for 9 months at a time and try to help somebody, maybe a year, when they have to move on to the next program. And they have to stay in that ambulatory program. If they don't make it through that program, they bounce back to us for more rehabilitation in order to get them back on track, to get them to stay away from substances, and also maintain their mental sanity. A rescue with classifications by individuals, prescription by professional and government aid services is essential criteria to practice while evaluating homeless people before they are placed in communities with permanent subsidized housing to avoid relapse, catastrophe, or nuisance. The programs needed immediately is Embark, composed of housing shelters with security, professionals, and medical staff to chart and classify the diagnosis of individuals, to tailor a prescription of aid required to rehabilitate patients who has a propensity to relapse. Relapse is the magic word. They relapse. Causes of addiction, mental illness, defects of character, and financial problems are notorious for relapses. It is not easy for them to assimilate without the ability to care for themselves and others and overcome their addictions and character defects. Regardless of what is attempted for aid, the homeless person must have or develop the desire through persuasive counseling to voluntarily undergo a specialized residential lockdown rehabilitation program. A doctor prescribes the programs depending on the rehabilitation clinic results. The doctor's opinion of placing the homeless in permanent housing should be considered necessary, not somebody like off the street that gets a social worker job could suggest temporary housing or transitional housing, but they cannot say that they're ready for permanent housing. because they'll end up back in the streets, even with Social Security, because they use the Social Security money to buy more drugs and not be able to care for them. And they don't pay the rent, so they get evicted. Now I have a check and a voucher walking around or living in a tent, and they just work off that. And that's what you have out there right now. Even veterans are out there working with the same program. They're not completely broke. They have something going on, but they have also an addiction problem, which becomes very difficult to rehabilitate. I want to thank you for your time. I want to ask you to please consider what I have said and to remember that the magic word is relapse, and in order to prevent relapse, we must rehabilitate. So the funding should go to rehabilitation clinics and centers that will provide a platform for the next phase, which is transitional housing, in order to achieve permanent housing and relieve the problem from being on the streets. Thank you for your time.